Good evening. Thank you so much for being here in this lovely weather. So thank you for braving the elements and coming out tonight. My name is Rebecca Johnson. I'm Executive Director of Design Philadelphia and the AIA Philadelphia. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 37th Louis I. Kahn Award. Tonight we are honoring world-renowned design firm Wiess and Manfredi. We are so pleased to have Marion Wiess and Michael Manfredi here tonight to accept the award on behalf of their firm. Thank you so much for being here. We are honored to continue this wonderful remembrance of the rich, rich legacy of Louis Kahn. His educational and architectural leadership in Philadelphia and the world beyond is important to us here at Design Philadelphia. We could not produce this event tonight without our dedicated volunteers, our staff, our partners, our board, and our sponsors. Tonight, I especially want to thank our presenting sponsor, Gattuso Development Partners. Thank you so much to John and Ann for your support. We really, really appreciate it. Our platinum level sponsors, we have Longwood Gardens, Milburn, Macris, Plusidon, and Sadin, MIS Capital. Thank you so much for sponsoring the VIP reception this evening. And Clemens Construction, thank you so much to Steve and your entire team at Clemens for supporting so much of what we do at Design Philadelphia and at AIA. Thank you. For our silver level sponsors, thank you to GBCA, Jaros, Baum, Bolos Consulting Engineers, Langen, National Development, National Real Estate Development. Sorry, did I go too fast? Sorry, what happened? University of Pennsylvania Frez and Neubauer Family Foundation. Thank you so much. Our bronze sponsors, thank you to Bancroft Construction, Fairmount Park Conservancy, and Elif Driscoll, Gilbane, Pella Windows and Doors, and Thornton Tomaselli. Thank you so much. We also have WHYY as our media partner and Art Printing as our printing sponsor. So thank you so much. Tonight's event is not only a fun and educational and one of the best networking events of the AEC industry, it also is a really important fundraiser for our K-12 programming. Design Philadelphia has recently rebranded, and part of that has really been around bringing in all design disciplines to help us introduce the young people of Philadelphia to design. I really want everyone to understand how important this program is to that. I will have a short, brief video to talk about our program. Here we go.
This is the football field, and this we're gonna make some little posters. I made a dog right here.
Oh, that's cool. Just gonna say, we love your logo. Oh, I love that. Super smart. They are thinking on a totally different level right now, thanks to the program. Allows them to think about things that they wouldn't think about, neighborhood, how it looks, how it's designed. So it really just broadened their, mindset.
We think it's part of our charge to go to these schools, go to these areas, these populations, and introduce students to architecture and design.
Children know who they can be by what they see. So when we bring architecture into our space, into our children, they're able to see that they can create these things.
This gives students a great opportunity to learn the real life experience of an architect and all the different types of career paths that they could get into.
Not just career paths, but vocabulary that we've been using in our everyday lessons. It's changed the whole dynamic of my class in such a positive way. They know when our architects are coming in, they are geared up, they're ready to go. They're running back from recess every day because they're ready to start these projects.
Getting a general sense for how design works and how things are thought through, and that really anyone can be part of the design process and have their opinions heard and influence how the world around us is shaped.
Historically, there's an underrepresentation of minorities in the architecture. We could begin to understand what a pipeline looks like for diversifying and increasing representation within discourse.
And I think it's helpful to just get a sense of context where we are and the people who have access and don't have access to design education sometimes.
This is a real opportunity to engage. That's why I would encourage firms to consider joining this program to better, again, our profession and the people that we're touching in general. If we really are concerned about how effective we are as a profession in all of the communities that we're in, we need to touch those communities in some way.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of AIA Philadelphia and Design Philadelphia. We need designers from every background, every perspective, to really help us solve some of the most pressing problems facing our city and our region. I hope that our firms, colleagues, community can really see this as an opportunity to inspire the next generation of designers. All right. Thank you for your patience with the technology. All right. Michael, where are you? Michael Spain, can you please stand up? I want to give Michael a round of applause. Michael is just, there's really no shortage of demand, so this is the plug for if your firm is interested or if you're interested in volunteering. We need you, especially for the fall semester. We have a lot of schools that are looking to be filled. And also that if you are interested in redirecting some of your state tax liability to this program, you can do that. We are an approved educational improvement organization in Pennsylvania, so reach out to me for details. So thank you. This evening really is only happens because of our chair of the Louis Kahn Memorial Committee, Bill McDowell. So Bill, I would like to invite you up to the stage and thank you very much.
It's great being here tonight. I love this event, and it's an honor to be able to do this. And Design Philadelphia is really proud to continue the remembrance and the rich legacy and educational and architectural leadership of Louis Kahn. And his work and teaching had an enormous impact on generations of architects that continue this day. I was thinking last night, though, this year marks the 50th anniversary of his death. And it's not surprising that many of even his disciples have left us. And we've sort of lost that direct linkage of his influence with people that worked directly with him, which just sort of dawned on me last night. But I thought the beauty of this profession is that the buildings remain and the spirit endures, which enables his influence to continue. And this annual honor is not bestowed upon architects that imitated him. Past honorees have had vastly different styles of architecture. This really is an honor that we bestow to those who, like Kahn, strive for beauty, who innovate, who seek the timeless, who teach and nurture, and now, importantly, protect our planet. We're thrilled this year to honor a firm whose practice is based upon those principles, a firm whose influence is worldwide, and a firm that understands the responsibility of what comes with it. Thank you, Marion and Michael, for accepting our invitation. Design Philadelphia and the Kahn event look to gather the profession and many friends to celebrate the importance of the design and to recognize achievements. I would like to express tonight the gratefulness that I have for the Philadelphia community, who year after year come out to support this event. All of you out there this evening, thank you. This has become a familiar place to see one another every year, but more importantly, acknowledge Philadelphia's role in the architectural education process, the experimentation and launch of new ideas in planning and design, and simply the importance that our community places on the design profession. That is what the Kahn event is about. I'd also like to follow up, Rebecca, with a special thanks to John Cattuso, who is the longest and most significant contributor to this event over the past 37 years. John is responsible for much of the skyline of Philadelphia through his work with Rouse and Liberty Property Trust, and now with his own firm, Gattuso Development Partners. And I'd like to thank all of our sponsors who support this event that supports our design education program, which you just saw a little clip of. That really is what this evening is about. This honor is given to individuals, people who have personally enriched the profession, the lives of people who have worked for them, been taught by them, and the people who have simply enjoyed the buildings that they have been responsible for. Marion and Michael have dedicated their lives to building good buildings, and we look forward to hearing from them tonight. And for their formal introduction, I'd like to introduce Jane Pepper, the board chair of Longwood. Thanks, everyone.
thank you, Bill, and thank you, everybody, for being here. And Bill told me not to talk about their resume, because you can read that anywhere, but to talk about what it's like to work with Wiess Manfredi. And my congratulations to you, Bill, and to the Kahn Award Selections Committee, because I cannot think of a better couple, a better firm to receive this award. And my congratulations, Marion, Michael, and to all of the team that you work with. So here we go, thinking about a huge new project that we have at Longwood. Some of you may have seen all of the construction traffic there, and we call it Longwood Reimagined. And it's the biggest, boldest step that Longwood has taken since Mr. DuPont built his amazing greenhouses in the 1920s. And we had to be really careful about who we chose as the architectural firm for this project, bearing in mind that they would have to deal with not only a staff committee, but also a trustee committee, and also the 1.5 million visitors that we get each year, because many of them seem to think that they own Longwood and that they own Longwood's legacy. So in preparation for these remarks, I talked to several people who've been very involved in the building and the development of this project. And first would be Paul Redman, our wonderful CEO, who's taking a much well-deserved vacation in Hawaii this week. And next was Sharon Loving, who is our Chief of Horticulture and Facilities. And Sharon has been at Longwood for 39 years. And then next on my list was Claire Agri, a landscape designer who was very involved with Marion and Michael in developing the strategic plan about a decade ago. And then I also talked to Anne Papageorge, who's well known around Penn as your Senior VP of Facilities and Real Estate Services. And Anne is hugely helpful on our trustee committee. And then finally with Ed Brown, who's the Senior VP of Food and Beverage at Restaurant Associates, who take care of all of our culinary activities. And when I asked people, why did we choose Wiess Manfredi, to a person they said, because the aesthetic with Michael and Marion and their team is that the building has to fit into the landscape, and with them it is never the other way around. And as Paul, who's married to an architect, said, I know how those architectural egos get in the way of projects. I can hear some laughing in the audience, maybe it's happened to some of you, but with Michael and Marion, you can be assured that that will never happen. And then also, the other thing everybody said was that they were always bringing innovative solutions to the table. And they wouldn't come and slap one solution up on the screen and say, this is what you have to do. They would come with 3 or 4, maybe even half a dozen, and they would sit and say, we want to talk about these possibilities. And you can bet for a bunch of people who think they know everything, that was very appealing. And then also, the other thing, Ed Brown said from Restaurant Associates, he said he's never worked with an architectural firm that was so eager to listen, and they listen very well, and also to collaborate. So I really give them full press for everything that they've done to make this project as easy as possible for us to do. And the other thing is that at Longwood, we love working with Marion and Michael. And I'm probably going to get emotional when I talk about this because we've been through many meetings together. You're both incredibly engaging, very bright, very accessible, and always full of enthusiasm and interesting designs and ideas. Marion is especially articulate, but sometimes, as Sharon said, she wished she brought her Webster's dictionary to the meeting. Because Marion would sometimes be talking about things that we didn't totally understand. Michael would see the puzzled expressions, and would pitch into the conversation explaining the concepts. And also, Michael is a very talented artist, so he always travels with his sketchbook. And Michael, sometimes those little sketches save the day, I would say. So to everyone at Wiess Manfredi, congratulations, and thank you from everyone at Longwood. You have given us, here I go again, some magnificent buildings, and I can't wait for all of you in the audience to come and see when we open in the fall. And the other organization that I'd like to say thank you to right now is the group at Bancroft Construction, because you two listen, you enjoy working together, and we have had a great time with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Bill. And we are so honored to be here, and thank all of you for being here. Design Philadelphia, we also want to, among other things, thank you for all you do to illuminate the value of architecture and what it can bring to the public realm and for all generations. So Michael and I are so deeply honored that I'm afraid, like Jane, my voice will crack briefly, because in many ways this is profoundly moving for us. For us, Kahn transcended the divisions between modernism and humanism, between teaching and dreaming and realizing architecture, between abstraction and the tactile permanence, and he brought enduring value to every building and landscape he shaped. So we're deeply honored by this recognition, especially knowing that this award has distinguished so many architects that we admire, and it is indeed a privilege to be recognized among this group. We love this photo that includes Louis Kahn, Bob Venturi, Aldo Jergala, all connecting at Penn through teaching and through architecture. And Aldo, who was our mentor, we met at Jergala's office, he was an early recipient of the Distinguished Award, and he continues for us to be a continuing source of inspiration. We both teach, and the nature of our teaching and writing recognizes that asking the right questions over time, we discover can be more important than responding to the questions that have been asked of us at the beginning of each project. In fact, each project carries with it a series of questions that starts the fantastic and unpredictable trajectory of design to realization. We're deeply grateful to the clients that have entrusted us with their dreams, the universities where we've been fortunate to teach, here at Penn, for me, Michael at Harvard, and to members of our office whose talents and energies bring life to each project, and we share this recognition with all of them. We began our collaboration on projects both speculative and real that identified new reciprocities between architecture, landscape, urban design, art, and infrastructure.
This will sound like a polemic, but I think it's important to situate some of our preoccupations. The territory of architecture should concern itself with the whole of the built environment. We seek to broaden the definition of architecture and search for opportunities to consider, both in physical and disciplinary terms, a larger territory for architecture. Our interest, and indeed our preoccupation, which I think hopefully you'll see registered in the projects we'll share this evening, lies in transcending disciplinary distinctions to create new reciprocities that enable us to address pressing social and environmental challenges. Now more than ever, the agency of design and architecture must be expansive, agile, and broad in scope. Rather than offer utopian solutions, a kind of one-size-fits-all, we gravitate towards solutions that are tactile, that are specific, and that drift across disciplinary distinctions and disciplinary boundaries. And in fact, a current book, which shares many of the kind of underlying thoughts this evening, alludes to this idea of positive drift.
So this evening what we did was we identified cameos of 11 projects that give you, in a sense, a trajectory of the good fortune that we've had to begin with some impossible questions and to be able to be part of this adventure, over now more than 2 decades. We began our collaboration, Mitchell Jurgala, mostly intrigued with each other's looks. But then we discovered that we had something more deeply in common, which really had to do with this idea that architecture had been given to those who could choose it and pay for it, but very rarely recognizing those who could not. Well, a group that had been overlooked ever since they had served, since the Revolutionary War, were women who'd served in the military. Michael's mother served in the military and asked us to enter this competition to recognize them. The site itself that they were going to be recognized at was a McKim Mead and White retaining wall, meaningless in fact. And so for us, the question was, could we somehow connect the barriers that women had faced and the barrier that that retaining wall represented, and start to think of it as something where breaking through those barriers could actually illuminate and offer an opportunity for those voices to be heard and for their story to be told. And that story could be seen in a 150-foot diameter arc of glass tablets, each tablet inscribed with the narratives of and about the women who had served, and all of this resting at Arlington National Cemetery. And for us, I think it's the magic of the temporal, in this case sunlight, passing through these letters and texts carved and etched in the glass and creating those stories inside to be ephemerally read when the sun is sharp, but disappearing on occasion when they're not. And yet forever, this group that had yet to be recognized and now can be recognized are always seen in context of monumental Washington, and also seen as now central to bringing light to this enduring landscape. So for us, in many ways, the most important thing in our work has always been trying to find a new definition for what public can be and what nature can mean to the public realm. So our most recent book, Public Natures, started to look at really a few of our projects, in this case the Brooklyn Botanic Garden Visitor Center, as places where, and I think as Jane so aptly said, our inclination to say landscape first, it's the largest and most enduring thing, and architecture should follow. Interestingly enough, if you look at the entry to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, which you can see a parking lot there, and you can see the beautiful cherry esplanade inside. Their desire was for us to locate the visitor center right at the heart and on axis with the cherry esplanade. Our thought was that the entry to the garden needed a little love. And in fact, in this particular case of that entry, 42,000 people visit on Mother's Day each year. That's a long line. So we started to think about what would happen if we could be 100% architectural and urban on one edge and be 100% landscape on the other side. What could you do over 400 linear feet to create a building that was neither purely architectural nor purely landscape, but somewhere in between? And in fact, you can literally see this kind of connection with the copper roofs, the historic buildings from 100 years ago, and then moving into the landscape, maybe in this case, a 10,000 square foot roof that adds a new dimension of green to the garden. The idea of something that is a chameleon, in this case, structured architecturally, wandering into a new form, was one where we felt that that idea of actually beckoning in and arriving at the edge of the city would make it almost urban in its context, and that in many ways sectionally, because it would be embedded into a 25-foot high hillside that separated the museum from the garden, that we could actually have something that was a gradient that was completely architectural, as you can see on one end of this trajectory, and completely landscape on the other. And yet that liminal space that is in this case neither a full landscape trellis, but not really a piece of architecture, is a place where you can slalom through the building with the visitor center on one side. And yet, as you start to see this, it's literally choice between the garden and the passage to the city that you can choose. Now, these curves, in many ways, while they seem natural and organic, they did follow the path of the garden, had more work to do. And in this case, the geometry of that edge of the roof and the ground plane are carefully following the drip line of a very rare flowering green cherry tree. And it's one where, whether you're inside or outside, there's always that sense, if you're at the visitor center, that the garden is beckoning you outside. And finally, as we reach the end of this 400-foot linear building, if you will, it's a two-sided room that actually can seat 260. But embedded in the hillside, if you look at the clear story above, you can start to see that sense of all the levels of the garden coming into focus at this location.
So that room registers itself as an overtly architectural element, a kind of lantern, depending on the time of day. But this issue of, I think, environmental responsibility that we all share can be seen here. This is a hardworking building. In a way, it's a machine as well as, we hope, a place of beauty, a place of transition. So it's all about capturing water, which increasingly is precious, cleaning it, and then ultimately discharging it into a Japanese pond, which then goes into a larger body of water, and then is returned so that we can use that water once again. There are a series of probably several hundred geothermal wells that provide a kind of level of heating and cooling. So the building, in a large measure, is very much literally about the earth. But Marion talked about the kind of geometries of the building, and they do follow the kind of the beauty of the existing trees planted by the Olmsted brothers, but also take in the kind of extraordinary topography of the building. And here you see, as it reaches into the garden, the building becomes quiet. It almost disappears. At times at night, it's a very subtle glow. We were fortunate, about 10 years after the building opened, to, in effect, extend the kind of footprint of the building, the kind of agency of the building, into a kind of hillside. And this was an opportunity that was important to the garden. This was a site where the hill was starting to erode, but also a very important way in which they might make this part of the garden fully accessible. So we naturally wanted to avoid the slide on the left, which is the kind of typical condition. And I think working with the garden decided that this could be an enormous handicap ramp, but seen as a giant garden, a kind of belvedere that would allow you to move from the higher parts of the garden down 21 feet to the lower parts of the garden. And it's an extraordinary feat of construction. Building landscapes is often thought of as something sort of simple. You move dirt around. But in fact, I think this is a highly engineered project. But we hope that no one thinks of this as purely a handicapped ramp. It's an opportunity to create another garden, to create another set of views, another way of seeing the garden in a way, and extending that reciprocity between building and landscape. So we'll share a short video. We tend to forget there may be some ambient sound. Architecture is about the body. It's really, in this highly digital world, it's about the sounds as well. So we'll talk about Longwood Reimagined, one of our projects that's very close to our hearts. We've been working with Longwood for 10 years. I think architecture is very, very slow, but increasingly that slowness is, I think, one of its great rewards. It sits in the kind of Brandywine Valley along a ridge, kind of an extraordinary, beautiful pastoral landscape, and in a way a landscape saved by Pierre Dupont, who came and saw the beauty of this kind of setting with its pre-colonial history and saved it from extensive lumbering. And so in a way, this man who was a prodigious inventor, an incredible philanthropist, and obviously an extremely successful businessman, was in a way an inspiration. This idea of organizing a series of elements on the ridge was, I think, a beautiful start. And we wanted to respect that kind of alignment, that sort of topographic acknowledgement of how this kind of geology had formed this area. So there's a new conservatory. There are a number of projects, an admin building, a restaurant, and a water lily court. We'll focus on only a few of those that are particularly interesting, that speak to, I think, the ethos of this project, which is really depicted in this kind of a sketch that Mary and I do. We often draw together as a way of communicating. So the formality of Pierre Dupont's original conservatory, in our mind, could start to relax as it moved across the ridgeline with new construction, new buildings, new gardens. And that sense of relaxation could also be seen sectionally. So the conservatory could have a sort of slightly looser, asymmetrical organization, an organization that for us, its structural ambitions, I think in many ways are a nod, a quotation to the kind of beautiful allée that we see here, beautiful allées actually at Longwood, the way in which the kind of the inherent beautiful structural logic of nature could teach us. So this is the view of the conservatory. It's a little bit about the size of a football field, so it's an extraordinary large building. And how could we start to, in a way, domesticate it, give it a kind of sense of both tactility but also scale? So working with Reed Hildebrand, extraordinarily talented landscape architects, we thought that the kind of canopy of the conservatory, its placement of columns, could start to enter into a conversation with a series of gardens. And those gardens, in some cases, travel across water. There's a didactic story, a story about a Mediterranean climate, which is becoming increasingly relevant to our warming climate. It's an opportunity also for playfulness. Longwood's known for its extraordinary floral displays, so the structure becomes an armature for those displays.
And as we know from working with Longwood for over a decade, it's grown incrementally over time, and some elements have been ready for rejuvenation. And so the idea, though, of their conservatory, which is nearly 100 years old, having a companion new conservatory was, in a sense, a humbling bar to rise up to think about the fact that Pierre Dupont's level of innovation is one that needs to be brought forward into contemporary terms. Glass buildings are not noted for their sustainability. And so if you think about where the innovation really needs to reside, it's not just in the aerial size that you can see, but it's in the subsurface. Of course, it's geothermal, and there's 1,000 linear feet coming through 10 earth ducts that are bringing the natural temperature of the earth, which is in the mid-50s, which enables it to be very efficient, either raise the temperature a bit or lower it a bit. And yet, on top of it all, it's a living, breathing building. So the walls move like gills on a fish. The roof moves, again, in ways that you might imagine even in a production greenhouse. And it's gathering light, in this case, the clearest glass you can possibly have rather than reflective, because, in fact, those plants need the light. If you look at this edge, which runs, as Michael said, this is a 32,000 square foot building, and it dips in a catenary, and yet the datum of the operable gills, if you will, those operable shutters of glass, follow a water's edge, and yet it's really that living, breathing too that you see on the roof, because the roof too is deployed, and all of this is automated to respond to temperatures and effectively create an artificial climate that is absolutely perfect year-round for that Mediterranean garden. Now, as Michael showed that first slide, and you can see it on the left, Longwood Reimagined really was in preparation of reimagining many parts of it. In this case, aging greenhouses were quite wonderful that you can see on the left-hand side of the slide. And yet one very small yet very special greenhouse needed to come to life in a new way. And Longwood was fortunate to be in a sense, the proud hosts and ambassadors of the Cascade Garden. Roberto Burley Marx, it's its only extant garden in all of North America. And so taking that slightly hidden location that was near many of the smaller greenhouses that had, in a sense, been past their useful life, and now bringing it center stage, you can see the new location on a green grove between the historic conservatory and the contemporary ones, is able to bring to light this vision. And we were fortunate to be able to create a new glass house for it, in this case with slightly more generous proportions and a lot better systems, so that that garden can thrive again, but it's being reconstructed as we speak right now. Again, though, as we start to think about what all of this together is, it is the ensemble of buildings and gardens first and foremost at Longwood that are magical. And one of them is, in fact, the Water Lily Court. And Sir Peter Shepherd, who here has deep connections at Penn as well, authored this beautiful garden, and yet it had started to fall into a place of no man's land, particularly with this transformation. We created a new arcade around it to frame it, give it stature and give it life, and also, in a sense, enable the conservatory to be something that you're discovering through layers of arcades, a grove of trees, and finally peeking out on the horizon is in fact something that is coming to life very much as we speak, with huge thanks to Bancroft for the care in all the fabrication of what you're starting to see now. Now, some people look at this and wonder a little bit about the columns, wonder about the source of inspiration. And Michael mentioned in many ways, you can see the sycamore grove in the distance, that the columns that are in the current historic Longwood Conservatory are protagonists in that experience. And unlike a lot of contemporary conservatories now that span massive vaulted spaces, we loved that intimate relationship between the architecture and the landscape. So these columns, as they reach out, very much like a tree trunk becoming a branch, transcending column and beam distinctions, are really going to be able to draw light in to this relationship between landscape and architecture. And we're very excited. This is a cameo here, and we hope all of you come out in November. And Bancroft's on time and on schedule, right? But you can start to see now on that crystalline ridge that Michael mentioned, the kind of dream and the ambition of being able to see reflected in that now, the arrival reflecting pool, something that is neither architecture, neither garden, and neither land nor water, but somehow Longwood reimagined, embodied in something that we're looking forward to seeing soon. And yet, on the other side of the equation is social infrastructure being a preoccupation for us. So much of our lives now are caught up in looking too tightly at a little 3-inch by 5-inch screen. And yet, architecture has an opportunity to bring all of us together. But particularly on multi-level buildings, there's more work to do with that. And so when we think about the social infrastructures that can revolutionize inventions and things that actually cross disciplinary boundaries, seeing Center for Nanotechnology for us became the most extraordinary opportunity to look at urban ideas, campus ideas, and what it means to actually look at Philadelphia as a place that has 5 remarkable greens, and the university itself, whose identity has emerged around greens. And yet the engineering precinct on the campus had less green than one could say is the heart of the campus. So when we interviewed for this project, one of the first things we thought about was how could landscape begin to create a role. And maybe if we were to think about how the building is situated, it could unfold and frame a new landscape, heart to the engineering campus, but also reach out and up and demonstrate in many ways what engineering can do, which is somehow the improbable and impossible. And indeed, you can see here that while a lot of people think that this cantilever is one of the boldest things, in fact, it's the central suspended columns that you see above and the gravity-bound wall that are doing very interesting things in a very tight entry area. And yet all of it comes together to say that nanotechnology, this is the first, in a sense, cross-disciplinary building that was arts and sciences and engineering, is a destination to unfold. And there's mysteries to ask about. If you see the amber glass on the left-hand side, that's looking into the clean room. We had wondered why you could only have a little amber portal to look into clean rooms, and it was because it was blocking out all the infrared light. So our question was, could we in fact see that science and bring that connection between that magic inside of the clean room to anybody who might come to the building? And in this case, I think Penn has a lot in common with Design Philadelphia, that they start early with the pipeline to be able to get them onto the other side of that glass wall. So in this case, though, the frit on the glass is actually casting shadows that remind you about what time of day it is. And yet, we need to do a shout out here to our clients at Frez here at Penn, and also to Eduardo Glant in particular, who said that because there's 20-foot floor-to-floors here in the lab building, the elevators had to be super far away not to cause vibration, that we had to create the most irresistible stairs possible. And indeed, each of these stairs have a collaborative opportunity on the way. And at any given moment in the building, whether you're on one end or the other, that sense of knowing that there's something going on and that there's activity, seeing and being seen, we think is really at the heart of collaboration. And at the very top, the Glant Forum, named as a gift in honor of that vision, is also that upper cantilever is one where there's chairs that can look out at the campus beyond or meetings inside. But most importantly, it's one where all of this, especially at night, comes to special life to let people know, in a sense, that this is part of a horizon of engagement with the campus and engagement with the future. So if you look at this film, I think for us, what we enjoy, and I certainly enjoy teaching at Penn every day, is taking the long walk from the train station to see this building come to life in different ways, and especially at night, it certainly has its own way of collaborating with the city.
So to kind of further this preoccupation of architecture, its infrastructural capacity to create social connections. This is a project done probably about 15 years ago at Barnard College, part of Columbia University. And the idea was to kind of reconnect two disconnected landscapes through the agency of a building. And this was our site, believe it or not. This was a student center on Broadway, no less, fortified. The city was projected out and the campus in. The two would never meet. But it was an opportunity for us and for the college to, in a way, showcase the extraordinary activities that occur at Barnard, the extraordinary art programs that occur at Barnard, and to situate them right on Broadway. So it's a kind of giant Tiffany window that builds on the existing foundation. So there's a sense of, in a way, reusing what is applicable, but giving it a new life. And the idea of creating a kind of social agenda in a multi-level building is always a challenge. So there are a series of ascending public rooms that reach the top. And despite the fact that these are glazed for acoustic privacy, there's always a sense of seeing and being seen, as Marion mentioned in the Sing Center. The sense that you might be having a coffee and see a kind of art exhibition or an architectural program, for us, I think, was an opportunity to kind of bring these different disciplines that literally were in different parts of the building together. And similarly, it was an opportunity to kind of reconnect in a very literal way the two very disconnected parts of the campus. So whereas there was a very significant wall, we developed a much more finely graded connection between the historic garden, which you see at the bottom of the screen, and the larger, more expansive area. As architects, we naturally wanted to think about how you could circulate through the building kind of sense of the geography of the building and its context, and of course placed the senior architectural studios in this prime location. Our client, Judith Shapiro, said this was going to be her office, but fortunately the architecture department prevailed. But it was also an opportunity in a primarily brick campus context. If you know Columbia, it's primarily brick. And the challenge was to kind of situate a building that would speak to its time, and through a material that may not be brick, yet had to kind of share the chromatic DNA. So we explored different kinds of sort of color integral terracotta infused glass. And in the course of doing a series of sketches, loved the kind of grainy quality that the paper and the kind of charcoal would start to kind of give, and tried very hard to kind of see how the glass could be etched so it's not entirely transparent, not entirely opaque, but has this sort of mysterious translucency. And you can start to see at times the kind of facade becomes bright orange in the early morning light. And what had been formerly a very fortress-like relationship to Broadway, to the city, we hope becomes a much more transparent and inviting. And in turn, the building has this kind of chromatic shift, this sort of sense that it's, in fact, a hybrid.
So those two projects, if you will, had multiple levels and a lot of scale and complexity. And yet we were asked to do one very recently, the Sci Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale. And the question was, we have the tiniest space available and the tiniest budget available, but we want to create a new heart to the engineering campus at Yale, which is hidden behind the brutalist Becton building on the right and the historic collegiate Gothic SSS building on the right, and sorry, on the left is Becton building. And then in the distance, one of our less distinguished engineering buildings from recent times. What is striking, of course, is that there was really no sight to see, which made us a little sad. And so we thought about it and we said, well, what if that is our site indeed? What if you could look through those gravity-bound opaque walls and start to see just a ray of light? If this is supposed to be the Center for Innovative Thinking, what if, like an Edison bulb, one would know that is always a place full of light? They asked us to conceive of it as an addition to the building on the right, and that's Breuer's Becton building, or in addition to what they acknowledged was one of their less distinguished buildings. And our thought was that both would be a disaster and nobody would think about innovative thinking. And so we suggested that maybe we could think about it as really opening the lens of this tiny project to one that would transform and create a new landscape for engineering, a new heart to the campus, and then locate this building really as just a central little ellipse in the campus. Well, formidable kind of setting, and you could see the historic collegiate Gothic landscape that I'm standing at the base of, and you could see the formidable wall that separated the rooftop of that one-story lab that's underneath. And we suggested that we could take that wall down and be able to connect an old landscape and invent a new landscape, and with that create an ellipse that is one that in many ways now is as transparent as possible around this sea of opacity, and in fact takes the curvature of glass, and because it can be structurally stronger through that curvature, eliminate all the additional columns that we would have had to pay for. So we had it fabricated in China to save money on columns here. But what's interesting here is that this really, and you can see this was just when it opened, and this is a place of innovation. What we've learned is furniture on wheels goes along with innovation, apparently, so this can be reconfigured at all times. But it's not just that it's about that opening with great views and connections, but it's also being able to tune it in different ways. So whether it's in the evening or with the glare of southern light, that this can be changed, but with a clear story at the eye level rather than above. And as Michael pointed out, in some of our projects, we're very interested in visual connection to create social infrastructures, but knowing that we need acoustical distinctions. And so those meeting spaces and breakout areas above have sight lines, but acoustical distinction from the collaborative studio below. For us, I think one of the most exciting things, though, was to try to create a happy marriage between the collegiate Gothic SSS Tower in the distance and Beckton on the right, with its formidable sort of geometries and concrete. Because if you see reflected in the left on our building, we've merged the language of collegiate Gothic with gravity-bound Beckton. So that was our delight. But more importantly, though, the hope is that with all the more introverted labs that surround the area, this extroverted little element at 12,000 square feet can connect the engineering community at Yale. Now that's a tiny project. This is a big one. And this is another one that's had nearly 10 years? 12 years. We've been working with the State Department on the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, India. And what began as a question about how could we renovate the embassy building plus a few other buildings became a profoundly different kind of project as we got to understand both the site, the subject, and among other things, the cost of time. What's been very inspiring about our journey working with the State Department and working in India is that there's a long legacy where architecture and landscape have very much in common. They need to have more in common now because there are times where there is significantly too much water and other times where there is way too little of it. At the time that Edward Durrell Stone built one of these landmark modernist embassy buildings, it was a very optimistic moment and a very important moment about how we connect our countries together. And yet, he was inspired by the Taj Mahal with that big body of water as a reflecting pool right in front of this main symmetrically elevated building of the embassy. Over time, security layered on so many other parts and pieces that it could no longer serve the functions that needed to serve the country as an embassy. So looking very carefully at the red dotted lines here, while our charge is to do 12 new buildings, renovate a significant number of others across a 27-acre campus, divided by a city road, really very little of it had been part of the original vision. And slowly over time, one building came after another. We were struck by the fact that not one building came because of another, except at that moment when Edward Durrell Stone did the main Chancery building and the ambassador's residence. So we started to think about connecting them through a journey, through a landscape, and a landscape path that might slalom from one side to the other and connect these experiences together. And as we started to think about that, it was crafting a new heart to the campus, not about one building at a time, but one building because of another around a central landscape. And that linear garden, which is now under construction, we're going to be going in 3 weeks and meet Ambassador Garcetti and see the fact that there's over 900 people on site today, every single day, building this, and it should be realized. Phase 1 in 4 years, still a long run. And yet, when we think about it, it is being built very intentionally, wall by wall, foundation by foundation. And we love the fact that walls have had deep meaning in India, and those layers actually layer public to private. They frame precincts just as they are doing here, in some cases for security, in some cases for, in a sense, creating a garden arrival for those who are getting passports and visas. And yet, as we think of it all coming together, it's the idea that there's also, from our point of view, an enduring respect we have for the legacy that began there in 1968 and what we are continuing. And these two new and old buildings are in dialogue with each other, seen through a new landscape.
So India, Marion touched on the environmental challenges of building in India. Interestingly enough, there's, I think, metrics that indicate that in a relatively short period of time, our climate will be very much like the climate of India. So it was an opportunity, I think, to both acknowledge the beauty of the Edward Durrell Stone Chancery, which you see on the right, and we sort of pushed our building back as a way of acknowledging its historic importance. But whereas there was a very large reflecting pool that was part of a very different environmental agenda when the chancery was built. What we've done is kept a very thin layer of water and then built a very significant cistern so that when there are monsoons, we can capture as much water as we can and then slowly use it over the course of the year during the droughts. The building is rather complex. Embassies are extraordinarily complex, and it is sectionally, we hope, a very interesting building. By pushing a large portion of the building, about 30% of the building, below grade, we can also minimize the heat gain and keep some of the areas cooler. Those lower levels are kind of brought, there's natural light by lower level courtyards, kind of sunken courtyards. We can also capture water that way. But importantly, keep the height of the building no higher than the original Edward Durrell stone building. We can also try to think of opportunities that are actually quite ancient, evaporative cooling, thin sheets of water that cool the entry to the building. And in this case, it has a very large, virtually a kind of umbrella, large canopy to provide shade. Shade is extraordinarily valuable in India. And that entry then can find its way to create a kind of more ceremonial setting with Indian stone, makrana, and there are ways in which, as Marion noted, the walls that slowly kind of weave their way around the building can come into it and again help thermally cool things where shade now becomes, in a way, the primary driver of the architectural forms. But also building on the early experimentation of the original Edward Durrell stone chancery, the idea of using this ancient jolly screen technology to create a kind of vertical lattice that would allow views from inside to outside, but also temper the kind of very harsh light that is part of Delhi. So you can start to see how that plays out on our sketch, the building to the right, but also the topography changes too to provide, again, natural light to the lower levels of the building. And that you can see played out along this long garden that Marion talked about, a kind of tapis vert, a green carpet that connects new and old. This, I think, preoccupation that we are all facing with environmental challenges registers in this recently completed museum, the Baker Museum in Florida. Florida and India will become increasingly similar in their environmental agendas. This is, in a way, a child born or project born out of Hurricane Irma, which managed to, in a way, destroy the museum, not as much physically, but there was significant damage, air and water infiltration, that the building essentially had to be significantly renovated. But it gave us an opportunity to take what was a very hermetic, almost mausoleum-quite quality, and kind of open it up and create a much more welcoming Center for Arts and Performance. So you see the new building on the right, that kind of these triumphal arch, I suppose, I'm being a little generous, and this giant bubble, both of which were heavily damaged. Sometimes by subtraction, we as architects can create better spaces than we can by addition. So this is, in a way, a kind of an essay in subtraction, strategic subtraction, by taking the kind of big bubble, which is also an extraordinary heat gain on the inside. We could open up this courtyard so that it's much more pleasant and, in a way, inviting to a much larger community. So it's a setting for all sorts of things. During COVID, performances occurred outside. Again, the lessons that we are all learning from our rather recent past are extraordinarily applicable in creating kind of architectural forms. It's, in a way, out of this kind of moment of crisis, there's a moment of opportunity. So shaded courtyards, places in the evening when things are cooler, the ability to circulate both not only through an elevator, but also through a series of stairs that are often used performances. Those performances also occur in a series of very carefully calibrated, acoustically tuned rooms. We connect the new and the old through this sort of serpentine gallery or promenade. And of course, it is a museum for art, so the galleries have to be very simple, very efficient, and have a kind of, in a way, a quiet moment of architecture. Whereas the building itself now can accommodate two entries, Previously, it was much more inverted and introverted. So the sense of opening this up, and through, I think, a very, very dramatic natural event, we hope that the building can become much more generous toward its community.
So, as Michael talked about the necessary evolution at Artist Naples because of a disaster, we think about the kind of slow disaster of many cities who've lost their connections to their natural waterfront, for instance. And in our book, Public Natures, we talked about evolutionary infrastructure as a larger way to think about design as now having to enter realms that it used to be held separate from. The Olympic Sculpture Park for us was this incredible adventure with the Seattle Art Museum and the city itself, because they had, in many ways, lost their connection to the water, which was so defining, obviously, through trade and exchange in the port, to its life and identity, but had precluded any kind of connection to city life and public life at the water's edge. And when we entered the competition, we wanted to know what the site was, and we discovered it was 3 separate sites divided by a highway, train tracks, a crumbling seawall, a contaminated site because there's Union Oil of California, a 40-foot grade change, and a trolley barn that couldn't move. And we thought, wow, this is really for us. Very exciting. And so what we started to think, though, was really how simple can you make it to transcend all these problems? And so what we came up with, and you can see this is the kind of completed project here, which was effectively a park that wandered from the city to the water's edge. Now, that's 200,000 cubic yards of earth, so let's talk about that. I mean, as we started our first sketch here, we were just thinking, oh my God, this is nuts. You know, we've got this crumbling seawall, it's contaminated, there's a trolley barn, there's icons, there's traffic going through it, it's a high-bodied, wide-bodied trucking route, like, oh my God. And started to think about what they do on golf courses, because it's only 9 acres. They zigzag you back and forth so it feels infinitely bigger than it ever was. And in this case, if you zigzag, you see different views of the port, of the city, and the water's edge. Of course, it is in an infrastructurally loaded site, and when our beautifully poured-in-place concrete walls in our schematic design came in at double the budget of the entire project, we had to resort to highway engineering. And so what we learned from our engineers, our civil engineers, MK, were fabulous, is that we could use MSE, or mechanically stabilized earth, pack it up in gabion baskets, and then we can clad it in precast panels that could fit on trucks, and they could actually overlap each other. This was our idea, is that because we were told it was going to crack if they overlapped and there was seismic activity, you'd never notice. So the thought was taking this 200,000 cubic yards of earth that were being excavated for the museum expansion downtown, so we got all that earth for free, which was great, and to think about actually creating a whole new topography that could transcend all these divisions of highway and train tracks, but also create intimate places for art and discovery. And you can start to see this is on opening day, where this whole kind of crazy invention of the zigzag was also hosting some very important artwork. And we are very sad about the loss of an extraordinary sculptor and friend, Richard Serra, who here was, while Wake, the piece was being installed in the valley that we created for him and for his work. And I will say, deep envy of Richard Serra's ability to convince the client that he needed our foundations to be 15 feet larger in every direction for each 39-foot piece, because he wasn't sure until the crane arrived exactly where he wanted to put it. That's power. And yet, it turned out that he put it exactly where they were in the drawings, after all. So he was right the first time. But it is an extraordinary piece. And yet, as we started to think about this diagram of unfolding the site as, in effect, an entire project, so too the Kunsthal here, the pavilion itself, takes a miniaturized version of that sectional unfolding to be able to accommodate a garage and to accommodate the pavilion art and cafe inside.
So sometimes we're surprised. This was supposed to be a kind of descending amphitheater to take in Richard Serra's very solemn and serious piece, and yet it's now become a kind of favorite. So we love the idea that programs can inhabit architecture in unexpected ways. We think we have a level of control, but we don't. And yet, I think some of you might recognize Calder's extraordinary sculpture Eagle, which was, I think, for a number of years very beautifully placed here in Philadelphia. But for us, and working with the museum, is an opportunity to establish a kind of foreground to the extraordinary Olympic mountains. So there's always a sense of both foreground and background, which become a kind of a way in which you can understand or see architecture or sculpture as a way of understanding your environment. So lots of little sketches about the topography of this park. Marion talked about it descending to the water's edge, in a way covering, rather than through a formal object-like bridge, letting the landscape cover the roadway. And here we're actually over a very significant wide-body highway going into Seattle, but you would never know it. And you can start to see that kind of interplay between the kind of rigor of the structure and the kind of, in a way, a nod to the sort of formal French garden, yet given what we hope is a kind of environmental agenda. So someone perhaps not caring at all about art could take in art as they're heading home. The museum loves to think that 50,000 people see their museum, and they do, including those who take the train from Los Angeles up to Vancouver. Richard had thought that one of the most extraordinary aspects of what we did in this park was to feature the trains. For him, they were giant kinetic sculptures, and that, I think, allowed us to work with a number of artists to kind of take in the kind of temporal and the kinetic, the kind of thing that you typically would want to hide. And that sense of rebuilding the waterfront, I think, was one of the things that we, in some ways, are most proud of, because it allowed us, through working not only with one juvenile salmon specialist, but two, who didn't agree with anyone about what juvenile salmon liked, to create a new beach. So we were able to, in a way, recreate juvenile salmon habitat, which, of course, as you know, was central to the Northwest and to the peoples who had been living in the Northwest for hundreds of years. So in a way, we think of this as the kind of the sculpture park's hidden garden. It's an opportunity, we now know, having gone back 5, 10, 15 years, that juvenile salmon have returned. So again, there's a sort of, we hope, an agency to architecture and to landscape that is, I think, performative in its environmental capacities. And we'll show a little film, again, the idea of movement, sound, ambient sound, locating you specifically in a place. So this is the Kunsthal. The gravel makes a very particular kind of sound, and you can see these and hear the beautiful foghorns, tugboats. And it does rain in Seattle. Isn't she cute? I mean, this is, we couldn't have planned it. And we love the trains, again, the kind of, both the sound and the movement become sculptures in and of themselves. So this is a project very much in its infancy, and again, goes back to this issue of how to build, how to create public settings that are hybrid, neither architecture nor landscape, but both. We're working with the LA Natural History Museum on an extraordinary site, the La Brea Tar Pits on Wilshire Boulevard in the heart of Los Angeles. What's traditionally been, I think, the big kind of crowd pleaser is these mastodons, saber-toothed cats. But what's being discovered is that the Pleistocene, which is an active excavation site, the Pleistocene era was the last era of climate change. So there are lessons in the microfossils, the pollens that are being discovered. So from giant mastodons now, the important discoveries are microscopic. So it's extraordinarily relevant to what I think all of us will be facing. And Los Angeles, as you know, is going through an incredible climate change. But we love the sense of history and mapping that kind of history as part of the research that we love to do on projects, and seeing perhaps if in that history the kind of surface, subsurface could become protagonists, which of course they do, particularly as the kind of oil and tar seeps up. So we created a kind of, decided to save part of the Page Museum, which you see with a kind of space frame, expand it into a new edition. It's part of Los Angeles' cultural history, and then develop a kind of triple loop that would connect the, in a way, the areas of excavation with the interior of the museum. So effectively turning the museum inside out. So at times you can wander across the site. It is a public park. At times you cross the bridge of the tar pit and you can actually smell the methane and really understand the geologic forces in a very haptic way. And you can also see excavation occur in real time. So the sort of sense of bringing that science quite literally to the surface was part of the agenda.
And as Michael mentioned, this is the largest paleontological active excavation site in the world in an urban area, and it is busy 362 days a year. Now, that's very interesting when you start to think about this being a place of science. It's a public park, and it's also not very far from Hollywood. So we started to think about this kind of mystery of what is coming out of the ground and what the old Page was, which is on the lower part, framing a public green that belongs to everyone, and what a new expansion that could host the collection could be. And what we realized is that there's this tremendous inability in some ways to get a window or lens into this, because the original Page Museum was simply an earthwork with a space frame over it. So we started to think about these connections, that being in the earth is extraordinary, but that collection which has been so hidden and in the backs and underneath those angled walls, what if that collection could come out and be seen and have a much more tactile relationship to visitors to really understand this science, and what has been pulled out of this earth is actively informing science today. And it's from that miniature tactile engagement to the more awe-inspiring, charismatic mastodon and mammoths that bringing new light through the darkness of the tar is amazing. Now, that lens that you see, the kind of connective lens within the museum and this drum that reaches up, is one that is not so very far from the fact that Hollywood is nearby. And by night, cutting through that lens that connects the old and the new is the capacity now to actually project those stories in films of, and this is actually in a film where all these mastodons and mammoths are actually walking across the screen, and you could hang out, you know, ideally with a blanket and actually see science unfold at night. And yet it is really this kind of triple loop. It's about unfolding not only a story, but letting you enter anywhere from any part of the city, from any part of the street, and also become part of this larger cultural destination. You could see LACMA already careening across Wilshire Boulevard. And it's all of these in dialogue with each other that make it stronger, rather than one thing in a sense as separate from another. Now, this question of what it means to connect community becomes very, very interesting when we think about New York City and its harbor and its waterfront. And in this case, Hunters Point South Waterfront Park became for us one of these remarkable opportunities to be in one of the most dangerous edges you possibly can be in these days, which is at the water's edge, which is ever changing. And yet, if we think about this side of Long Island City, the prospect to Manhattan, all its landmarks, the bridges, etc., is extraordinary. And yet this piece of land, like so many, and you could see the site sort of dotted around on the upper left-hand side of the screen, was really just the remnant of an industrial site, contaminated, of course, also, like Seattle. And yet its legacy had been one that first was wetlands, then a port, then part of a city. And all of that came into a fraught kind of moment of vulnerability when we think of Hurricane Sandy, where the waters rose so high that everything, in a sense, had to be re-questioned in terms of how a project might be conceived. And when we began the project, these were only nascent concerns that became revolutionarily important. And so part of the site, and part of in this case, working with Arup and TBA, we were looking at creating a new infrastructure that would enable, through the creation of a park, to encourage developers to actually build on these sites, because this would become, and now is, the largest affordable housing complex in the city and the largest one built since the 70s. Now, very interesting to think about this, in a sense, this strange remnant site that we found a lot of virtue in the kind of movement and topography that you'd see later on the right-hand side, to think about active recreation on one end and discovery on the other. And yet, at all times, think about preparing to allow the water in rather than raising the walls higher to keep it out. And in fact, at that central green, and we'll talk a little bit about this, it's that idea that you could actually catch and release water with care and release it out as it comes to flood. And of course, yet this playing field, which is used by the school across the street and by the community at all times, is one where you can actually bring into focus so many things, which is a community and recreation and the incredible prospect to the city beyond. So it really is kind of a charm bracelet where there's rail gardens, there's playgrounds, etc. And yet this playing field and the pavilion in the distance do some interesting work that may be less apparent to the eye. Obviously, we talked about storm surge and water collection, but the pavilion itself is powering the park. And as you look at this folded, pleated metal plate roof, perforated, as we learned, for the very necessary need to keep uplift from lifting the building off the ground, it's got solar collection on the south side. It collects water for irrigation through the channels. And it also provides a very necessary shade for people who are coming in on the ferry to come to the park. For us, though, the part that gives us great joy is it is really hosting and welcoming a community that gets to enjoy this park now as their own and as part of that water's edge. And in fact, there was a slightly illicit beach called Water Taxi Beach that was behind the chain link fence, and we thought we would make a more family-friendly version of it on the other side of the pavilion, which you can see here.
By the way, this giant oval, parts of which are astroturf, conceals a very, very significant cistern, which was crucial during Hurricane Sandy. We captured the water and released it slowly. The Parks Department, who were very skeptical before Hurricane Sandy, of course, started, I think, to appreciate what we and many, many others had been advocating, which is a much softer approach to dealing with water management. The canopy provides shade, again, increasingly important in our kind of public lives, but also the realization that architecture can extend beyond its kind of context, like in Seattle, frame views that otherwise might not have been noticed, and in a way adjust and take great pleasure in the passage of light from day to night. So this, after completing the first phase, there was a new mayor, so we had to interview for the project again. This is New York, of course. But what was an incredible opportunity was to work on the southern edge where there was some topography there. On the East River, there's very little topography. And you can start to see how we wanted to take advantage of that topography to create a kind of giant belvedere that would get you out over the water so that there was some sense of looking up and down rather than just across. So that kind of heroic move was a way in which we could start to kind of give measure to some of the kind of natural topographies that were part of this site. And it becomes a kind of an extraordinary architectural and engineering opportunity. Again, working with brilliant engineers like Arup, it allowed us to kind of develop this 40-foot cantilever, which was fabricated in Maine in a kind of shipbuilding company, and then taken down the East River, hoisted, and positioned so that you could get an elevated view. So it's also a very sectional project. Marion touched on the idea of reclaiming, like a kind of giant linear sponge, the kind of wetlands that had been here in pre-colonial time that use the ability, the natural ability to kind of mediate flows of water, extremes of water. So we've able to recreate a wetland. You see it here in its infancy, and of course it's particularly beautiful as it changes over the course of the seasons. So at times these gum trees become brilliant. This is a kind of in a way, a peninsula that at high tide becomes an island. So again, trying to kind of use architecture and landscape to kind of heighten the natural perceptions of the world in which we are lucky enough to inhabit. And this becomes an opportunity for selfies, so it's become extraordinarily popular as a wedding destination. Who would have guessed? And in a way, this is our last project. It talks about the kind of what we hope are the emerging reciprocities between architecture and landscape as a productive way of dealing with serious and very pressing environmental issues. So this is the last film, again, capturing the kind of environmental quality. You can see kids playing soccer. That was in the fall. That's not me, by the way. So we'll close what has been a great, great honor and come back to Louis Kahn, one of our favorite quotes, which continues to resonate, and to paraphrase Kahn, great architecture, I would say great design, but great architecture must begin with the unmeasurable, must go through the measurable when it's being designed, and in the end, must return to the unmeasurable.
And as we reflect on, again, this deep honor that is so meaningful to us, to our firm, and to all the folks we've been lucky to collaborate with, we're reminded that in our increasingly interconnected and fragile world, design has the potential to unite us in wonder and to shape the course of our days. And it has been our good fortune that has shaped the course of our lives. Thank you.
I love this event. That was wonderful. I got a little sneak peek and I said I was really excited for the talk, and you did not disappoint. That was really wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I want to thank our sponsors. Thank you so much to Gattuso for supporting us for so long. I really appreciate you, John and Ann, everyone. Thank you. I want to thank our platinum sponsors this year for Longwood. Thank you so much, Jane, and the board for supporting this event. Thank you to MIS. Thank you, Steve Gendler, Rich at Milburn Macris, Blue Siders and Staden. Thank you much to Clemens, GBCA, JBB, Langen, Penn, Frez. Thank you so much. Neubauer Family Foundation and National. Thank you to Bancroft for supporting this event. Thank you for being here tonight. Fairmount Park Conservancy, Driscoll, Gilbane, Pella, and Thornton Tomasetti, and our partners WHY and ARC. I really couldn't do this event without my staff, so I want to say thank you so much to Jermaine, Jelani, and Carly, because all of this, everyone's like, are you so stressed out? I'm like, no, I'm not. So thank you so much to my team. Thank you so much to Bill. Every year you work your butt off in so many ways, Bill, and this is so important to us and to me, and I'm so grateful for you for making this such a priority in your life. I appreciate it. I also want to thank the team at Wiess Manfredi. It was so great to work with your folks. Sophie was wonderful, so thank you so much. I know you're very busy too, so to add this into the agenda, we really appreciate it. I want to invite the chair of our board, Paul Avazier, to come up, and we're going to present the award.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Design Philadelphia, I want to thank all of you tonight for coming out. Your involvement and support of our programs and events such as this is what allows us to continue to bring programming out to the community, both to professionals and students alike, and we hope to see you at events moving forward. Thank you, Marianne and Michael, for your very thoughtful presentation and for sharing with us a glimpse of your work, your process. I have to second Jane's comments from earlier that really saw how you work with landscape first and bring the architecture into it. And not only that, but your ways of blending design with both community and nature is inspiring. On a personal note, I had no idea that you had done the Women's Memorial, but I remember as a teenager, probably not long after it opened, visiting and thinking about and being inspired about how this classical facade of the McKim-Mead white blended with the modern behind it, and everything just worked so well. So thank you especially for that. And so, as always, I have the honor on behalf of the Design Philadelphia board to present Marion and Michael and your team at Wiess Manfredi with the 2024 Louis Kahn Award in honor of your distinguished achievements as architects and for contributing to the storied legacy of Kahn with your presentation this evening. Congratulations.
Come over here.